Captain Threll Vascor stood on the bridge of the Dominion's Fang and watched the human battleship die on his screen. It was not really dying. It was losing. There was a difference, and Vascor knew it well after 11 years of war against the humans. A ship that died stopped moving and stopped fighting because it was broken. A ship that lost simply gave up because it saw no way to win. The human ship in front of him, a heavy cruiser called the UES Halcyon, was doing the second thing. Its shields were down to 9%. 2 of its 4 weapon batteries were silent. Smoke, or what looked like smoke on the sensor feed, poured from a hole near its engine section. Vascor felt something close to joy. It was rare for a Skarn captain to feel joy in this war. The humans were clever, and they fought hard, and they did not break easily. His people had learned that the hard way, system by system, for over a decade. But today, in this quiet corner of the Verath border, his patrol group of 3 warships had caught a single human battleship alone, far from any friendly fleet, and it seemed his luck had finally turned. "Signal from the human vessel, Captain," said his communications officer, a young Skarn named Pris Tellen. Her voice cracked with excitement. "They are requesting a ceasefire." "A ceasefire," Vascor repeated. He let the word sit in his mouth like a strange fruit. In 11 years, he had never once heard a human ship ask for a ceasefire. Humans fought until their ships were dust, or they fled at full speed and often died anyway. He had seen human crews ram their broken ships into enemy vessels rather than surrender. The stories of Skarn soldiers who had tried to board a defeated human ship, only to be met with traps, explosions, and soldiers fighting to the last breath, were common enough that most captains in the fleet treated a beaten human ship with more caution than a fresh one. But a ceasefire request was new and strange. "Open the channel," Vascor said. The screen flickered, and a woman's face appeared. She was human, which meant her skin was a strange pale color, almost like the inside of a shell, and her hair was dark and pulled back tightly from her face. Her eyes were tired, but steady. She did not look like someone who was about to beg for her life. She looked like someone doing a job. "This is Captain Elena Marsh, of the UES Halcyon," she said. Her voice was calm, almost bored. "Our weapons are down. Our shields are failing. I am requesting terms of surrender for my crew." Vascor's first officer, a heavy-set Skarn named Doran Kesh, leaned toward him and spoke quietly in their own language. "This could be a trick, Captain. You know what they say about boarding a human ship." "I know what they say," Vascor answered, just as quietly. "But look at her readings. Weapons truly are down. Shields truly are failing. This is not a bluff of numbers. This is a ship that has lost the ability to fight." He studied the human captain's face on the screen a moment longer. There was something in her eyes that did not match her calm words. It was not fear, exactly. Vascor had seen fear on human faces before, in old recordings from other battles, and this was not that. It was something closer to patience, as if she were waiting for something. He pushed the thought aside. Humans were strange to read. Their faces did not work quite like Skarn faces, and 11 years of war had not taught him to understand every twitch of a human brow. "Captain Marsh," Vascor said, switching his own translator on so his words would come out in her language, flat and mechanical but understandable. "I am Captain Threll Vascor, of the Skarn Ascendancy warship Dominion's Fang. You will power down your weapon systems completely and open your primary docking hatch. My boarding party will take control of your vessel. Your crew will be treated according to the laws of war. Resist, and you will be destroyed." Marsh did not blink. "Understood, Captain Vascor. Powering down weapons now. Halcyon out." The channel closed. For a long moment, nobody on the bridge of the Dominion's Fang spoke. Then Doran Kesh broke the silence. "That is the fastest surrender I have ever heard from a human," he said. "No pleading, no demands, no last words for her crew. Just agreement." "Yes," Vascor said slowly. "It is strange." He looked again at the sensor readings on the human ship. The Halcyon was a heavy cruiser, built for both fighting and hauling cargo, roughly the size of Vascor's own ship, but built along different lines, with thicker armor and fewer weapons per surface area than a Skarn vessel of similar size. It was not a small catch. Command would be pleased. A human battleship captured mostly intact, with its crew alive to interrogate, was worth more than a dozen destroyed enemy ships. Live prisoners could be questioned. Ship systems could be studied. Codes could be broken. This was the kind of victory that could change the shape of the war, if handled correctly. And yet, Vascor had commanded warships for over 20 years, first against pirates and rival Skarn clans before the war, and then against the humans once they came screaming out of their small corner of the galaxy, with fleets that should not have been able to fight the Ascendancy, and somehow did. In that time, he had learned to trust a feeling in his gut more than he trusted numbers on a screen, and his gut told him that something about this was not right. He looked at the weapon readings again. 2 of the 4 batteries were silent, yes. But not destroyed, just silent, powered down as if switched off rather than broken. The shields were failing, but they were failing evenly, all across the hull, rather than being punched through in one weak spot the way real battle damage usually looked. And the smoke pouring from the engine section, when he zoomed the sensor feed in closer, looked almost too perfect, too even. Like something venting on purpose, rather than a real hull breach, spraying atmosphere and debris in a chaotic pattern. "Kesh," Vascor said. "Run a full diagnostic scan of the Halcyon's hull. I want real numbers, not just what their own transponder is broadcasting to us." Kesh moved to his console and worked for a moment. "Scanning now, Captain. It will take a few minutes for a full structural read." While they waited, Vascor thought about the battle itself, replaying it in his mind. His patrol group had come across the Halcyon by chance, catching it as it moved slowly through a system with no other human ships or defenses nearby. The human ship had turned to fight rather than run, which was itself a little strange, since a lone cruiser facing 3 Skarn warships should have tried to flee toward the nearest human territory. Instead, it had engaged, fighting with real skill for almost 40 minutes, damaging one of Vascor's escort ships badly enough that it had to fall back for repairs, before its shields had begun to fail and its weapons had gone quiet one by one. 40 minutes was a long fight for a single ship against 3. It should have been over in 10. The human ship had fought hard enough to hurt Vascor's fleet, and then, right as it might have been finished off completely, it had asked for a ceasefire, instead of fighting to the end, the way human ships always did. Something about the timing bothered him. It felt less like a ship being beaten and more like a ship finishing a task. "Diagnostic complete, Captain," Kesh said. "The hull damage is real. Their shields are genuinely weak. But," he paused, frowning at his screen. "But what? Their reactor is at almost full power. Their life support is fully functional. Engines are warm, ready to move at a moment's notice. If this were a ship that had truly been beaten down in a hard fight, I would expect more damage to the internal systems, not just the shields and 2 weapon batteries. It is almost as if only the systems needed to make them look defeated were damaged," Vascor finished for him, "and nothing else." The bridge went quiet again. Pristellan, still at her communications station, looked up nervously. "Captain, should I signal the other ships to hold position? Should we call for reinforcements before we board?" Vascor considered it. Calling for reinforcements would take time, and would also mean sharing the credit for this capture with other captains, something he did not relish after chasing weak, uncertain victories for the better part of a year. His fleet group, small as it was, still had 2 working warships including his own, more than enough firepower to destroy the Halcyon several times over if it tried anything. Boarding a wounded ship with an overwhelming force nearby was standard practice, and he had done it a dozen times before without incident. But the feeling in his gut had not gone away. If anything, it had grown sharper. "No," he said finally, "we will not wait for reinforcements. That would take hours, and command will ask why I hesitated to take a prize that was already surrendered. But we will not be careless either." He turned to his boarding officer, a scarred veteran named Grath Osun who had led 100 boarding actions in his career. "Osun, take a full combat squad, not a standard prize crew. Full armor, full weapons, and have a second squad ready to follow if you send the signal. I want every human prisoner restrained the moment you find them, weapons class or not. And Osun, do not trust anything that seems too easy over there. Not a door that opens without resistance. Not a hallway that is empty when it should have crew in it. Nothing." Osun's mandibles clicked together in the Skarn gesture of understanding. "Understood, Captain. We will be careful." As the boarding shuttle prepared to launch, Vascor kept his eyes on the human ship, drifting now in space between his own vessels, quiet and dark except for its running lights and the faint shimmer of its failing shields. It looked, in that moment, less like a beaten enemy, and more like a trap, laid out and waiting to be sprung, patient as a predator that had already decided its prey would come to it. He thought again of Captain Marsh's face on the screen. Calm, patient, waiting. Waiting for what? The shuttle detached from the Dominion's fang and began its slow crawl across the gap between the two ships. Vascor watched it go, and for the first time since the battle had begun, he found himself hoping his gut feeling was wrong. It rarely was. Grath Aasen had boarded 23 enemy ships in his career, both human and other, and he had learned to read the mood of a ship almost the way one might read the mood of a living creature. A ship that had truly lost a hard fight had a certain feel to it. Crew scrambling to put out fires, alarms still blaring in places the enemy had not managed to shut off, wounded soldiers being dragged to medical bays, panic in the air even after the surrender was called. He had seen that feeling many times, on Skarn ships and on human ones both. The Halcyon did not feel like that. When his squad cut through the outer airlock and moved into the main corridor, the ship was quiet. Too quiet. The lights were dimmed, as expected for a ship running on backup power, but there was no smoke in the corridors despite what the sensors had shown venting from the engine section. No wounded crew being carried past, no alarms, just a long, clean hallway that led deeper into the ship, and at the end of it, standing in perfect formation, a group of 11 human crew members with their hands raised, weapons already laid on the floor in front of them. "That is not how a surrendered crew usually looks," muttered one of Osun's soldiers, a young Skarn named Vorik. "No," Osun agreed, "it is not." He approached the humans carefully, weapons still raised, scanning each face. At the front of the group stood a tall human man, with short gray hair and an expression that gave away nothing at all. According to the ship's transponder data, this should be the first officer. "Identify yourself," Osun said through his translator. "Commander Idris Kane, first officer of the UES Halcyon," the man said. His voice was as calm as Captain Marsh's had been on the screen, maybe even calmer. "My crew has surrendered as ordered. We are unarmed, and will not resist. Captain Marsh is waiting for you on the bridge." Osun studied him for a long moment. Something about the way Kane spoke, the easy way he stood, the total absence of fear or anger on his face, made the hair on the back of Osun's neck, the fine bristles that ran along a Skarn's spine, actually, stand up. "Restrain them," Osun ordered his squad. "All of them. Then we moved to the bridge." As his soldiers moved forward with binding cuffs, Osun caught Kane watching him with an expression that, on a human face, might have been the ghost of a small private smile. It was there and gone so fast Osun almost thought he had imagined it. Almost. He signaled his second squad to come aboard, and reported back to the Dominion's fang. "Captain, we have secured the boarding point and the first group of crew. No resistance, no injuries on our side. Moving to the bridge now, to secure Captain Marsh and the command staff." On the other end of the channel, Vascor's voice came back tense and clipped. "Good. Osun, report every single thing you see over there, no matter how small it seems. Every door, every room. I want to know everything about that ship before you reach the bridge." "Understood, Captain." As Osun's squad moved deeper into the Halcyon, past sealed doors and quiet corridors and rooms that all seemed slightly too clean, slightly too orderly for a ship that had just lost a 40-minute battle, he found himself agreeing more and more with whatever instinct had put that tension in his captain's voice. Something about this capture did not feel like a victory. It felt like the first step of something much larger, something the humans had planned long before the Dominion's fang had ever crossed paths with the Halcyon in the quiet dark of the Vareth border. And as Osun's boot echoed down the empty, waiting corridor toward the bridge, he could not shake the feeling that he and his crew were not the hunters in this story. They were walking, very calmly, into someone else's trap. The bridge of the UES Halcyon was smaller than Grath Aasen expected, and cleaner too. No sparks from broken panels, no smell of burnt wiring, the smell every Skarn soldier associated with a ship that had taken real damage. Just quiet consoles, most of them dark, and Captain Elena Marsh standing in the middle of the room with her hands already raised, waiting for them. "Captain Marsh," Osun said, You are now a prisoner of the Skarn Ascendancy. You will be treated according to the laws of war, so long as you and your crew cooperate." "I understand," Marsh said. She lowered her arms slowly, as one of Osun's soldiers moved to bind her wrists. She did not flinch or pull away. "May I ask what will happen to my crew?" "They will be held separately and questioned. What happens after that depends on how useful your answers are." Osun studied her face as he spoke, watching for any reaction. There was none. Just that same tired, patient calm he had already seen on Commander Kane. It was starting to feel less like a coincidence, and more like something the whole crew had been trained to do. He looked around the bridge, taking in every detail the way Vascor had ordered. 6 stations, most dark and powered down. A large tactical display in the center of the room, still showing a frozen image of the battle from a few minutes before the surrender. 3 Skarn ships closing in, the Halcyon alone and outnumbered. A row of sealed doors along the back wall, marked with symbols Osun's translator rendered as restricted, command authorization only. "What is behind those doors?" Osun asked, gesturing toward them. "Secure storage," Marsh said. "Command codes, classified charts, some backup systems, nothing that will work without proper authorization, and I will not be giving you that authorization." "We have ways of getting past locked doors without your help, Captain." "I'm sure you do." Something flickered behind her eyes, there and gone so fast, Osun almost missed it. "Go ahead and try." It was such a strange thing to say. A prisoner should be afraid, should be trying to protect whatever was behind those doors, should be bargaining or pleading, or at the very least showing some sign of worry about what the enemy might find. Instead, Marsh sounded almost amused, as if she knew something Osun did not, and found the not knowing a little funny. Osun reported everything back to the Dominion's Fang exactly as ordered, and Captain Vascor listened in silence, saying almost nothing until Osun finished. "Do not force those sealed doors yet," Vascor said finally. "Secure the rest of the ship first. I am sending our lead engineer, Sela Varnak, over to examine the ship's core systems before we touch anything marked classified. I want to understand what we are dealing with before we open a single locked door on that ship." "Understood, Captain." Sela Varnak had been chief engineer aboard the Dominion's Fang for 6 years, and in that time she had crawled through the guts of more captured enemy vessels than she could easily count. Human ships, in her experience, were built differently than Skarn ships, less elegant, in her opinion, but tougher in strange ways, with redundant systems layered on top of redundant systems, as if the humans simply refused to trust that anything would work the first time. She had expected the Halcyon to be more of the same, solid, blunt, over-engineered human construction. What she found instead made her uneasy in a way that was hard to put into words. She started in the ship's main computer core, a room deep in the ship's belly, protected by 3 separate blast doors that her boarding team had to cut through one at a time. Inside, the core hummed quietly, running at what her scanner told her was nearly full operational capacity. Strange, for a ship that had supposedly just been beaten in battle. "Captain," she said into her comm, "I am inside the Halcyon's main computer core. Power output here is at 94%. That should not be possible if their reactor took the kind of damage their outer hull shows." "Explain," Vascor's voice came back, tight and clipped. "I believe the damage to the reactor and to their weapons systems was managed, controlled. As if someone deliberately routed power away from certain systems to make the ship look weaker than it actually is, while keeping the core systems, life support, and engines at near full strength." Varnak ran her scanner along a wall of humming servers, frowning at the readings. "Captain, I do not think this ship lost the battle by accident. I think it was designed to look like it lost." There was a long pause on the other end of the channel. When Vascor spoke again, his voice was quieter, more careful. "Continue your search, Varnak. I want to know everything that ship's computer is doing, and I want to know before we open those sealed doors on the bridge." "Understood, Captain." Varnak worked for the better part of an hour, moving through the ship's systems with the careful patience of someone defusing a bomb, because in her experience, that was often exactly what she was doing. She found strange things as she went. A navigation log that showed the Halcyon had changed course 4 times in the last 2 days before the battle, each time adjusting to stay on a path that would bring it through this exact stretch of the Varath border, a quiet system with light Skarn patrol traffic and no major fleet presence, almost as if the ship had been steering itself toward exactly this kind of encounter. A communications log showing a single, very short, heavily encrypted burst transmission sent out less than a minute before the Halcyon had first opened fire on Vascor's patrol group. A transmission far too short to carry any real message, more like a signal than a conversation. And buried deep in the ship's secondary systems, a set of processes running quietly in the background that Varnak did not recognize at all. Code structured in ways she had never seen in any human ship she had studied before. "Captain," she said, her voice tighter now, "I need you to see something." On the bridge of the Dominion's Fang, Threll Vascor studied the data Varnak sent him and felt the cold, familiar weight of dread settle into his chest, the same feeling he remembered from the worst days of the war, the days when a battle that should have been easy turned suddenly, horribly difficult. "What am I looking at?" he asked. "I do not know, exactly," Varnak admitted. "It is a process running in the ship's secondary systems, using very little power, almost invisible unless you know exactly where to look. It has been running since before we even boarded, Captain. Possibly since before the battle even started. Doing what? I cannot tell yet. It does not appear to be a weapon, or a virus meant to damage our own systems when we connect to their network, at least not one I recognize. It looks almost like it is collecting something, gathering data of some kind, and holding it, waiting. Waiting for what?" Varnak hesitated before answering. "I do not know, Captain, but I do know this. When my technicians connected our diagnostic equipment to the Halcyon's network in order to examine it, that process became more active. Its power draw increased. It is as if the act of us examining the ship woke something up inside it." Vascor closed his eyes for a moment, thinking. Around him, the bridge of his ship hummed with its usual quiet efficiency. Officers monitoring the captured human vessel, the two escort ships holding position nearby, everything appearing calm and orderly. But the feeling in his gut, the one that had bothered him since Captain Marsh had first requested a ceasefire, had grown from a whisper into something close to a shout. "Disconnect your equipment from their network immediately," he ordered. "Do not touch their systems again without my direct order." "Captain, we have already." "Immediately, Varnak." "Understood, Captain. Disconnecting now." Vascor turned to his first officer, Doran Kesh, who had been listening to the exchange with a deepening frown. "Kesh, contact Fleet Command. I want them to know we have captured a human battleship that may not be what it appears to be. I want a full sensor sweep of this entire system, every ship, every signal, every anomaly, no matter how small." "Yes, Captain. Do you think—" Kesh hesitated. "Do you think this is some kind of human trap? A trick to lure our patrol group into a bad position?" "I do not know what to think yet," Vascor admitted. "But I have fought the humans for 11 years, Kesh, and in all that time, I have never seen them surrender a ship without a fight to the very end. Not once. And now, in the span of one afternoon, I have seen a human battleship give up after only 40 minutes of fighting, with its core systems still nearly at full power, with its crew calm and cooperative in a way that feels rehearsed rather than real, and with some kind of hidden process running in its computers that seems to wake up whenever we touch it." He shook his head slowly. "I do not believe in coincidences, Kesh. Not in this war. Not with the humans." He thought again of Captain Marsh's face, of the strange, patient calm in her eyes when she had spoken to him, waiting for something. He thought of Commander Kane's near smile, the one Austin had reported after securing the crew. He thought of a battleship that had steered itself, quietly and deliberately, toward this exact patch of space over the course of 2 days, as if choosing the time and place of its own capture. The pieces were there, floating in front of him like scattered stars, and Vascor could feel the shape of a constellation trying to form from them, though he could not yet see the whole picture. But every piece he found pointed toward the same terrible possibility. This had never been a battle that the humans lost. It had been a plan that the humans had carried out perfectly. "Austin," Vascor said, opening a channel to his boarding officer on the Halcyon. "Report. Have you opened the sealed doors on the bridge yet?" "Not yet, Captain. We were waiting for your order, and for engineering to finish their sweep of the ship's core systems." "Good. Do not open them yet. Instead, I want you to bring Captain Marsh to a secure interrogation room and begin questioning her immediately." I want to know why her ship surrendered. I want to know what is behind those sealed doors. And Osun. Vascor paused, choosing his next words carefully. I want you to ask her, directly, whether her ship's mission was ever truly to fight us at all. There was a pause on the other end of the channel, long enough that Vascor wondered if the connection had dropped. When Osun spoke again, his voice carried a note of unease that Vascor had rarely heard from the veteran soldier. Captain. I already asked Commander Kane something similar, when we were securing the crew. I asked him if his people understood what surrender meant to us, since humans usually fight to the end. He looked at me and said something strange. He said, "We understand surrender just fine, Skarn. We simply had a different mission today than winning the fight." Vascor felt the cold weight in his chest grow heavier still. Bring Marsh in for questioning, he said quietly. Now, before whatever that hidden process in their computers is, finishes doing whatever it is waiting to do. Yes, Captain. As the channel closed, Vascor sat back in his command chair and stared at the tactical display, at the small dark shape of the Halcyon drifting between his ships, quiet and patient as ever, holding its secrets close. Somewhere deep inside that ship, something was waiting. And Vascor was beginning to understand, with the sick certainty of a man who has already lost a game he did not know he was playing, that the waiting was almost over. The interrogation room on the Halcyon was small, meant for private meetings rather than questioning prisoners, but it worked well enough. Grath Osun sat across a narrow table from Captain Elena Marsh, her wrists still bound, 2 armed soldiers standing near the door. Captain Vascor watched and listened through a live feed from the Dominion's Fang, his own face on a small screen positioned so Marsh could see him too. Captain Marsh, Vascor said, his translated voice flat through the speaker. I will ask you plainly, and I would like a plain answer. Was your ship's mission today ever truly to defeat my patrol group in battle? Marsh studied the screen for a long moment before answering. There was something almost like relief in her expression, as if she had been waiting a long time to finally have this conversation. No, she said. It wasn't. Osun's mandibles clicked in surprise, but Vascor felt no shock at all, only a grim confirmation of what he had already begun to suspect. Then what was it? I can't tell you the full mission, Marsh said. I don't have authorization for that. And honestly, Captain, some of it I don't even know myself. My orders came in sealed packets, opened only when certain conditions were met. What I can tell you is this. My ship was never meant to win a fight against your patrol group. We were never even meant to survive this encounter as free crew. Surrendering to you today, in this system, at roughly this time, was always part of the plan. Vascor leaned forward slightly on his screen. Why would your command send a battleship and its crew into a fight they knew would end in capture? What could possibly be worth that cost? Marsh was quiet for a moment. Then she gave a small, tired shrug, the kind of gesture that suggested she had made peace with something long ago. Because sometimes the most valuable thing a ship can do isn't win a battle, Captain Vascor. Sometimes it's lose one, in exactly the right way, in exactly the right place, in front of exactly the right enemy. You are speaking in riddles. I'm speaking as clearly as I'm allowed to, Marsh said. You'll understand soon enough, probably sooner than either of us would like. Vascor studied her face on the screen, searching for any sign of a bluff, any crack in her calm that might suggest she was simply trying to unsettle her captors with empty words. He found none. If anything, the certainty in her voice made the cold feeling in his chest grow colder still. The sealed doors on your bridge, he said. What is behind them? Backup navigation systems, some encrypted charts, and one other thing. Marsh met his eyes directly through the screen. A data core, not weapons, not explosives, nothing that will hurt your boarding party if they open it carefully, just information. What information? Everything the Halcyon has gathered about your fleet since we started tracking your patrol group 3 days ago, Marsh said simply. Ship classes, weapon signatures, shield frequencies, crew rotation patterns, communication protocols, all of it, recorded and stored, waiting to be sent somewhere useful. The room went very still. Even Osun's soldiers, standing guard by the door, seemed to lean in slightly at those words. You have been spying on my patrol group, Vascor said slowly. For 3 days. Longer than that, honestly. if you count the wider fleet movements we've been tracking across the Vareth border for the last several weeks. But yes, specifically your group, for the last 3 days. We picked you because your patrol pattern was predictable, and because your fleet group was small enough that a single ship might plausibly be able to engage you and lose without it looking suspicious to your superiors. Marsh's voice remained calm, almost conversational, as if she were discussing a minor scheduling matter rather than confessing to an elaborate deception that had led to the capture of her own ship and crew. We needed a Skarn patrol group to board a human vessel and connect their systems to ours. That was the actual mission, Captain. Not winning, not even escaping, getting boarded. Why? The word came out of Vascor harsher than he intended, frustration finally cracking through his careful composure. Why would any commander sacrifice a ship and its crew simply to be boarded by the enemy? Marsh's expression shifted, just slightly, something almost like sympathy crossing her tired features. Because when your engineer connected her equipment to our network to study it, Captain Vascor, she wasn't just looking into our systems, she was giving our systems a door into yours. Back aboard the Dominion's Fang, Sela Varnak had returned to her engineering station and was running a fresh diagnostic sweep of her own ship's core systems, following Vascor's urgent order the moment Marsh's words had reached the bridge. What she found made her blood run cold, in the particular way that only a person who has just realized they made a terrible professional mistake can truly feel. "Captain," she said, her voice shaking slightly as she opened a channel to the bridge. "When my technicians connected our diagnostic equipment to the Halcyon's network, we created a data link between their systems and ours, even though we later disconnected the physical equipment. I did not think a captured, powered-down ship could use that link to transmit anything back out. I assumed a one-way connection, us reading them, not the reverse. Explain what happened, Varnak, clearly. Now. That hidden process I found earlier, the one that woke up when we connected to their network, I believe it used that brief connection to copy itself, or copy some kind of data package, into our own diagnostic systems. It has been sitting quietly in our equipment since then, and I only just found it because I went looking specifically for anything unusual, based on your warning." Varnak's voice cracked slightly. "Captain, I believe it has been slowly moving from our diagnostic equipment into our ship's wider network ever since. It is well hidden, and it moves carefully, using very little power so as not to trigger alarms. But it is there. It is in our systems, Captain. It has been in our systems for almost 40 minutes now." Vascor's hands tightened on the arms of his command chair. 40 minutes was more than enough time for a determined and well-designed piece of code to spread through a ship's network, especially one that had not been looking for it, especially one whose engineer had been too focused on studying the Halcyon's mysteries to consider that her own equipment might become a carrier for those mysteries. "Find it," Vascor said. "Cut it out. Whatever it is doing, stop it now." "I am trying, Captain, but it is," Varnak trailed off, staring at her readouts with an expression of growing horror. "Captain, it is not behaving like a normal intrusion. It is not trying to hide from detection anymore. I think it knows we've found it. She swallowed hard. "Captain, I believe it has already finished whatever it came here to do. It is not spreading further. It is simply sitting in our communications array now, and it appears to be preparing to transmit something. Transmit what? To where?" Before Varnak could answer, alarms began sounding across the bridge of the Dominion's Fang, a rising, urgent tone that every Skarn officer aboard recognized instantly. An unauthorized outgoing transmission, originating from their own ship, being broadcast on a frequency none of them had ever seen before. "Block it," Vascor snapped. "Cut the communications array. Now, before." "Too late, Captain," Varnak said, her voice hollow. "The transmission has already gone out. Whatever it was, it's done. It's gone." Vascor stared at the tactical display, at the small dark shape of the Halcyon still drifting quietly between his ships, and at the wider emptiness of space around them, suddenly feeling far less empty than it had only an hour before. Somewhere out there, something had just received a message built from data his own engineer had accidentally carried out of a trap, disguised as a captured prize. He opened the channel back to the interrogation room, where Captain Marsh still sat calmly across the table from Grath Osson, watching Vascor's face on the small screen, with an expression that held no triumph, no cruelty, only a kind of weary acceptance. as if she had known this moment would come, and had simply been waiting for it to arrive. "What did you send?" Vascor said, his voice low and dangerous. "What did you just transmit from my ship?" Marsh held his gaze steadily. "Everything we gathered about your fleet's technology, Captain Vascor. Your shield frequencies, your weapon signatures, your communication protocols. All of it, packaged up neatly by the systems your own engineer carried straight into your ship's core network and sent out to exactly the people who needed it." "Who?" Vascor demanded. "Sent to who?" For the first time since her capture, Captain Elena Marsh allowed herself something close to a real smile, small and tired, but unmistakably genuine. "To the fleet that's been waiting quietly on the other side of that debris field for the last 6 hours, Captain," she said. "The one your sensors haven't found yet, because it's not supposed to be found until it wants to be. I imagine you'll be meeting them very soon." The bridge of the Dominion's Fang erupted into motion as new alarms began to sound, different from before, sharper and more urgent, the unmistakable signature of a full sensor sweep detecting something large and close and moving. Threll Vascor closed his eyes for one brief moment, feeling the full weight of understanding settle over him at last. He had captured a human battleship, believing it to be a prize. It had, in truth, been a key. And somewhere out in the dark beyond the debris field, a lock had just been opened. The debris field had been sitting quietly at the edge of the system for as long as Skarn survey records existed, the remains of some ancient rock formation shattered long before either humans or Skarn had ever built a warship. Vascor's fleet had passed near it dozens of times over the past few months without incident, and no sensor sweep had ever shown anything more dangerous hiding inside it than cold stone and old ice. That had never been because nothing was there. It had been because whatever was there had not wanted to be found. "New contacts, Captain." Pris Tellen's voice cracked with alarm as the sensor readings flooded her console. Multiple large signatures emerging from the debris field, bearing 214, range 40,000 kilometers, and closing. Vascor was already moving toward the tactical display, watching as the quiet emptiness of space around the debris field suddenly filled with shapes. Not one ship, not even a handful. His sensor operators counted them as fast as they appeared. 6 human warships, larger and more heavily armed than the Halcyon had ever been, decloaking in a tight formation that suggested careful planning rather than a chance encounter. At their center, a shape larger than the others, its outline unmistakable, even to a Skarn officer, who had only seen a few of its kind before in fleet intelligence reports. "That is a human dreadnought," Doran Kesh said, his voice tight. "Captain, that is a Meridian-class dreadnought. We have never seen one deployed this far from human core territory." Vascor stared at the display, feeling the pieces of Captain Marsh's confession finally click into place with terrible clarity. A lone battleship, sent to draw in a Skarn patrol group. A deliberate surrender, timed and staged. A hidden data package, smuggled out through his own engineer's careless connection, carrying every detail his crew had learned about Skarn ship systems in 3 days of careful observation. Shield frequencies, weapon signatures, communication protocols, the exact information a waiting fleet would need to strike hard and fast against an enemy that did not yet know it was under attack. The human fleet had not been waiting to see if the Halcyon would be captured. They had been counting on it. "All ships, raise shields, weapons free," Vascor barked, his calm captain's voice returning, even as his mind raced. "Kesh, signal our escort ships to form defensive formation immediately. Pris, get a warning out to Fleet Command, now, before." "Captain, our communications array is not responding." Tellen's voice was rising toward panic. I think whatever that hidden process did to our systems, it did more than just send that one transmission. Something is still wrong with our comms." Vascor cursed under his breath, a low, guttural sound in the Skarn tongue that needed no translation. Of course the humans would not stop at simply stealing information. Whatever had crawled into his ship's network through Varnak's careless connection had likely done more damage than any of them yet understood, quietly working its way through system after system, while the crew of the Dominion's Fang had been distracted by interrogations and sealed doors. "Varnak," he shouted into the comm. "Status on our systems, now." "Working on it, Captain, but it's bad. Weapons targeting systems are lagging. Shield modulation is delayed by almost 2 full seconds, and I think... A pause, filled with the sound of frantic typing. Captain, I think whatever that thing did, it mapped our shield frequencies, specifically, so the enemy would know exactly how to punch through them. That's what it needed the connection to our network for. Not just to steal data, to confirm it, in real time, against our actual live systems. On the tactical display, the human fleet opened fire. It was, Vascor would later admit to himself in the quiet aftermath, one of the most precisely coordinated attacks he had ever witnessed in 11 years of war. The human warships did not spread their fire randomly across his small fleet group the way an unprepared force might. They struck with surgical precision, weapons fire converging exactly on the specific shield frequencies that Varnak's stolen data had revealed, punching through defenses that should have held far longer than they did. His 2 escort ships, caught in the open, and still struggling with delayed system responses from whatever hidden intrusion had crawled through their networks, took heavy damage within the first minute of the engagement. Return fire, Vascor ordered, gripping the arms of his command chair as his own ship shuddered under a barrage of incoming weapons fire. Kesh, evasive maneuvers, get us clear of their primary firing arc. Trying, Captain, but our engine response is... Kesh's words were cut off by another impact. This one close enough that sparks flew from a console across the bridge, and one of the junior officers cried out in pain. Vascor watched the tactical display with grim, focused calm, even as chaos erupted around him, the professional detachment of a career soldier, taking over where panic might otherwise have crept in. His fleet group was outnumbered, outgunned, and fighting with compromised systems against an enemy who knew exactly where to strike. By any reasonable measure, this battle was already lost. The only real question left was how much of his fleet, and how many of his crew, he could save from the wreckage of a trap he had walked into with his eyes open, and his guard, in the end, not nearly high enough. Signal to all ships, he said, his voice steady despite everything. Break formation, fall back toward the jump point. We cannot win this engagement. We save what we can. Captain, what about the prisoners on the Halcyon? Tellan asked. Osun's boarding team is still aboard. Vascor's mind flashed back to the interrogation room, to Captain Marsh's tired, knowing smile, to her words. I imagine you'll be meeting them very soon. She had known this was coming. She had been waiting for it, calm and patient, because she had trusted her people to arrive exactly when they were supposed to. Osun, Vascor said, opening a channel to the Halcyon. Report your status, now. The channel crackled with interference, before Osun's voice came through, tight with tension. Captain, we have a situation. The prisoners, they are no longer cooperating. Commander Kane and several of the crew have somehow slipped their restraints, and I believe they are attempting to retake control of key systems on this ship. We are still holding the bridge, but... An explosion sounded somewhere behind Osun's voice, distant but clear even through the comm static. Captain, we cannot hold this ship and evacuate at the same time. Orders? Vascor closed his eyes for one brief, painful moment. Every instinct he had built over 20 years of command told him to order Osun to hold the line, to fight for the prize they had captured, to not let a beaten enemy simply take back what had already been won. But every piece of evidence gathered in the last hour told him something different, that the Halcyon had never truly been a prize at all, that its capture had been bait from the very beginning, and that continuing to fight for control of a ship built specifically to be a trap was exactly the kind of mistake that would cost him men he could still save. Pull your team out, Osun, he said. Abandon the Halcyon, get your soldiers back to the shuttle, and return to the Dominion's Fang immediately. That is an order. Understood, Captain. Pulling out now. As Osun's team began their retreat, fighting a running battle through the Halcyon's corridors against a crew that had somehow, impossibly, turned the tables on their captors from within, Vascor turned his attention back to the wider battle raging outside. His fleet group was taking a beating, his escort ships badly damaged, his own vessel limping under the weight of compromised systems and relentless, precisely aimed enemy fire. The human dreadnought at the center of the enemy formation had not even needed to fire a shot yet. Its smaller escorts, armed with Vascor's own stolen shield data, were doing more than enough damage on their own. Captain, Kesh said, his voice grim, we are approaching the jump point. If we can hold together for another 2 minutes, we can escape this system entirely. Then hold together for 2 minutes, Vascor said, watching the tactical display with the same fierce, focused calm he had carried through a dozen desperate battles before this one. That is all I ask of this crew today. 2 minutes. Behind him, on a secondary screen still linked to the shuttle bay, he caught a brief glimpse of Grathossen's boarding team fighting their way back toward their shuttle, dragging 2 wounded soldiers between them, while somewhere behind them in the Halcyon's corridors, Commander Idris Kane and the rest of the human crew fought with the same calm, disciplined precision that had characterized every single moment of this entire elaborate deception. They had never once, Vascor realized, actually lost control of the situation. Not when they surrendered, not when they were boarded, not even now, retaking their own ship in the middle of a battle they themselves had engineered from the very beginning. The Dominion's fangs shuddered under another impact, alarms blaring across every station on the bridge, and Threll Vascor gripped the arms of his command chair and watched the jump point draw closer on the tactical display, one desperate second at a time, while somewhere in the dark behind him, the human trap he had walked into with such confidence continued to close its jaws. The jump to safety felt like it took a lifetime, though the ship's clock later showed it had been only 90 seconds from the order to fall back to the moment the Dominion's fang tore itself free of the Varath border system and into the folded space of a hyperspace jump. When the stars steadied again on the other side, Threll Vascor sat in his command chair and allowed himself exactly 3 seconds of stillness before the reports began pouring in. They were not good reports. One of his 2 escort ships, the Silent Blade, had not made the jump point in time. Its captain had reported catastrophic shield failure moments before the Dominion's fang entered hyperspace, and no further contact had been made since. The second escort, the Iron Current, had made the jump, but limped through it, with heavy damage across 3 decks, and a fire still burning in its engineering section, that its crew was struggling to contain. And the Dominion's fang itself, Vascor's own flagship, had taken enough damage to its shield generators and weapon systems that Sela Varnak estimated at least 2 weeks in a proper repair yard would be needed before the ship could be considered combat-ready again. Grathossen's boarding team had made it back to the shuttle, though not without cost. 2 soldiers had died in the fighting retreat through the Halcyon's corridors, cut down by a human crew that had fought with a speed and coordination that suggested extensive training for exactly this scenario. 3 more had been wounded, one seriously enough that the ship's medical officer was not yet certain he would survive the journey back to friendly territory. And the Halcyon itself, along with the small dreadnought-led fleet that had ambushed them from the debris field, had been left behind entirely, victorious and untouched by any lasting damage that Vascor's sensors had been able to detect before the jump. It was, by any measure Vascor could think to use, a disaster, and yet, sitting alone in his ready room hours later, staring at a datapad filled with the day's grim tally of losses, he found himself thinking less about the ships and lives he had lost, and more about the shape of the trap that had cost them. He thought about Captain Elena Marsh's calm, patient face, and the way she had never once shown fear, not when her ship was surrounded, not when she was bound and questioned, not even when she confessed to a deception that had led directly to the deaths of her own crew members during the retaking of the Halcyon. He thought about Commander Idris Kane's near smile and his strange, precise words, "We simply had a different mission today than winning the fight." He thought about a battleship that had steered itself deliberately toward capture, days in advance, choosing the exact time and place of its own defeat, with the same careful precision a chess player might use to sacrifice a piece for a greater advantage several moves down the line. And he thought about how thoroughly, how completely, that sacrifice had worked exactly as its planners intended. There was a knock at his door. Sela Varnak entered when he called for her, looking exhausted, her usually neat uniform smudged with grease and grime from hours spent tearing apart her own systems in search of every trace of the intrusion that had betrayed them. "Report," Vascor said. "I found it, Captain. All of it, I think, though it will take longer to be certain." Varnak set a datapad on his desk. It was elegant. Cruel, but elegant. A small piece of code, designed to do nothing but wait, quietly, until connected to an outside system. Once connected, it would gather whatever data it could reach, confirm certain details against live systems if possible, and then transmit everything it had learned the moment it found an opportunity, before quietly deleting itself so as to leave as little trace as possible. It did not damage our systems directly. It did not need to. It simply used our own curiosity and our own procedures against us. And the Halcyon itself, Vascor said. It was built for this, designed, from the start, to be captured, so that this exact scenario could unfold. That is my belief, yes, Captain. I do not think a normal battleship carries the kind of hidden processes we found. I think the Halcyon was purpose-built, or at least heavily modified, specifically for this mission. A ship whose true weapon was never its guns, but the act of losing itself, carefully and deliberately, in front of the right enemy. Vascor sat back in his chair, absorbing this, feeling something shift in his understanding of the war he had fought for 11 years. He had always believed he understood the humans, at least in the narrow, practical sense that mattered on a battlefield. They fought hard, they fought stubbornly. They did not surrender easily, and when they did lose, they lost loudly, in ways that made their strength and their desperation equally clear. He had never once considered that they might also be willing to lose quietly, patiently, and on purpose, sacrificing a ship and its crew not in a moment of desperate last resistance, but as a carefully planned move in a much longer game, whose full shape he still could not entirely see. "Send a full report to Fleet Command," Vascor said finally. "Everything. The battle, the interrogation, the hidden intrusion in our systems, the ambush, all of it, exactly as it happened, without softening any part of my own failures in the matter. Captain, you could not have—" "I could have been more careful," Vascor said quietly. "I felt something was wrong from the very first moment Captain Marsh requested a ceasefire, and still I proceeded with the boarding, still I allowed my own crew to connect our systems to theirs, because 11 years of war had taught me that a beaten human ship was a beaten human ship, and that I understood the shape of that defeat well enough to trust it." He shook his head slowly. "I was wrong, and other captains in this fleet may make the same mistake I made, unless they understand exactly how it happened. That is more important than protecting my own record, Varnak. Send the full report." Varnak nodded and left him alone with his thoughts. Weeks later, after the Dominion's Fang had limped back to a proper repair yard, and Vascor had delivered his report in person to a room full of grim-faced fleet commanders, he found himself standing before the aging Grand Admiral Thesic Van, one of the oldest and most respected voices in the entire Skarn military command structure. The old admiral had listened to Vascor's account in complete silence, his ancient eyes revealing nothing of his thoughts, and when Vascor finished speaking, a long quiet stretched between them before the admiral finally responded. "You understand what you are describing, Captain Vascor," Van said slowly. "You are describing an enemy willing to sacrifice a full battleship and accept the deaths of some of its own crew, not to win a single battle, but to gather intelligence and set up a much larger trap, executed with patience and precision across days of preparation. This is not the desperate, stubborn resistance we have grown used to fighting against the humans. This is something else, something closer to what our own military academies would call true strategic thinking. Yes, Admiral, and this troubles you." Vascor considered his answer carefully before speaking. "It troubles me, because I believed I understood this enemy, Admiral. I believed 11 years of war had taught me the shape of their strength, and the shape of their weakness both. What happened at the Varath border taught me that I understood far less than I believed. If they are willing to sacrifice ships and crew members in careful, coordinated plans stretching across days or even weeks, then every victory we believe we have won against them may, in truth, be a piece of some larger design we cannot yet see." Grand Admiral Van was quiet for a long moment, his old eyes fixed on some point beyond the walls of the briefing room. "There is an old saying among our people, Captain, from long before this war began. A predator that only understands strength will always be surprised by patience. The humans, it seems, have patience in greater supply than we credited them for." He turned back to Vascor, his expression unreadable. "Your report will be studied carefully, Captain Vascor. Your honesty in delivering it, even at the cost of your own record, will be remembered as well. You are dismissed." As Vascor left the briefing room and walked the long corridor back toward the docking bay where the repaired Dominion's Fang waited to return him to active duty, he found his thoughts returning, as they often did in quiet moments now, to Captain Elena Marsh's tired, knowing smile in that small interrogation room, weeks and a lifetime ago. Sometimes the most valuable thing a ship can do isn't win a battle. Sometimes it's lose one, in exactly the right way, in exactly the right place, in front of exactly the right enemy. He did not know what had become of Marsh, or Kane, or the rest of the Halcyon's crew after their ship retook itself in the chaos of the ambush. He did not know what larger campaign the intelligence gathered that day had ultimately served, though fleet reports in the weeks since suggested renewed human offensives along 3 different sectors of the border, offensives that seemed to strike with unusual precision, at exactly the weak points Skarn commanders had believed most secure. What he did know, with the hard-won certainty of a man who had learned an expensive lesson and intended never to forget it, was this: the humans he had fought for 11 years were not merely stubborn survivors clinging to whatever ground they could hold. They were planners. Patient, careful, willing to accept painful losses today in exchange for greater advantages tomorrow, willing to sacrifice a ship, a crew, even themselves, if the plan called for it, and disciplined enough to carry out that sacrifice with calm, steady precision, from the very first moment to the very last. It was not a comfortable thing to know about an enemy, but Threll Vascor had learned long ago that comfortable knowledge rarely won wars, and as he boarded his repaired flagship to return to the endless, grinding fight along the Vareth border, he carried this new, uncomfortable understanding with him like a blade freshly sharpened, determined that the next time his fleet crossed paths with a human ship that seemed too willing to surrender, he would remember exactly how much that willingness had already cost him once. The humans, he now understood, did not simply fight to survive. They fought to win, on a timeline longer and more patient than any Skarn commander had yet given them credit for, and somewhere out among the stars, Captain Elena Marsh and her crew were very likely already preparing the next piece of whatever larger plan the loss of the Halcyon had been designed to serve. Vascor intended to be ready for it, whenever and wherever it finally arrived.